evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Thank you for coming out tonight to this SE15 event, Sculpture Expo 15, called Intersection of Art and History, all about ice harvesting in Hudson Valley. The ice harvesting exhibit upstairs by historian Larry Thetford, and the Ice Saw Incorporated sculpture outside. That exhibit is outside Conrad Levinson's Ice Saw Sculptures on the Cutting Edge. Good evening, I'm Rita Gentili. I'm the director of Sculpture Expo 2015. And I want to welcome you to this event tonight. Thank you for coming. And a little introduction regarding our theme tonight. I want to say that an historian collects facts and stories of human interaction to prove the events which have given us our notions of history. Like the scientist, the historian uses deduction, literature, records, and artifacts, interviews, theories, and experimentation. The historian retells the story of geographic locations, puzzles out events in time, and demystifies social phenomena. It is foremost the historian's responsibility to create the clearest, most factual record of history for our enlightenment. Many times, historians must recollect the elements of history, data which have been used before, only to contextualize them in ever more accurate retellings of what was once believed to be true. An artist also collects thoughts, ideas, visions, and materials to realize those visions. It is an artist's job, among others, to sublimate their understanding of the world and its issues into a visual or tangible expression for the education or enlightenment of his or her fellow humans. Social, political, environmental, and personal themes yield concepts and ideas for contemporary artwork, whereas diverse materials yield the visible form of those concepts. An artist collects materials which speak to the vision he wishes to realize. Sometimes materials start as one integral object, but undergo a transformation through their reuse, contextualized into newly imagined forms. So what happens when an artist interprets the present with materials of the past? Can such work be truly contemporary, or does the work still speak of the time from which its separate elements originated? What when the physical vestiges of history make of it a living history and make the retelling of a contemporary experience? So let's explore the beauty of the materials and the tools of the industry, from their practical function to their renewed context in works of art. Let's explore also the process of ice harvesting on the Hudson River, the boom and the quieting of that industry, and the story of that time in the Hudson River Valley. Our conversation tonight, which is sponsored by the Red Hook Public Library, links the industry of the past to sculpture of the present, obviating one such time when art and history have intersected. So please welcome Larry Thetford, an historian who has written extensively on ice harvesting in the Hudson Valley, who is responsible for the exquisite models that we have seen on the subject, which are displayed upstairs in this inn. And Conrad Levinson, my co-curator in Sculpture Expo 2015, and a sculptor and collector of artifacts who has created many works using these and other tools of bygone industry. I want to make mention that we had hoped that Mr. Jim Haroldson would be here. He couldn't make it, unfortunately. He was a gentleman who has firsthand experience working on the river with his family and neighbors during the ice harvest. And as I say, unfortunately, he couldn't be here. But together, these men embody the intersection of art and history, ice harvesting in the Hudson Valley.
Well, for those of you who haven't been to the Illinois before, welcome. So we're going to start right off with the house next.
Working on it. There we go.
No, that's not it.
There you go. The ice house, okay. In 1880, there were 71 of these ice houses between Catskill and Castleton. There were 135 houses between Albany and New York City. Now, some of these houses were extremely large, some 300 to 400 feet long, 100 feet wide, and 4 stories or 40 feet high. That's a football field under one roof. That size of a house had a capacity of 100,000 tons of ice. So keep that in mind. There was a ice house in Germantown, Barrytown, Rhinecliff, and Statsburg. Across the river at Esopus, and another one across from the Rokeby Estate, which I'm going to mention a little later. Now, these ice houses were primarily constructed of wood, hemlock being the preferred wood that was harvested right out of the Catskill Mountains. They were double walled, and those walls were filled with either sawdust or wood chips for insulation. They were also painted a bright white to reflect the heat of the sun. In addition, they had these steam-powered elevators to move the ice up to the upper levels. And this would be the location of the steam engine. Besides the ice house, you would have not only the steam house, in which the workers would take their lunches to kind of warm up a little bit in there. There was a stables for the horses, a building for all the tools, and oftentimes there was a boarding house associated with the ice house. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. The guys who did the work. All right, and again in 1880, there were 20,000 men involved in the ice industry. That is the processing of the ice, and I'm not talking about the delivery guys down in the city. That's a lot of guys. These fellas came from not only New York City, but from a lot of the industries, local industries that kind of shut down during the winter. So farmers, the brickyard folks, loggers, quarrymen, fishermen, and boat builders all went to work on the ice fields in the wintertime. They also formed these gangs, and the gangs would sometimes just move from ice house to ice house as they finished loading it. And the gangs would sometimes compete with each other. Now, a good gang would load 600 tons of ice in an hour. So the Barrytown Ice House was a 60,000 ton house. So they could load that whole building in roughly 10 days to 2 weeks and then move on. All right. The day hour was 10 hours per day. They were paid by the day, not by the hour. Supervisors and bosses would make $2 a day. The switchers and runmen, $1.75. The stackers, $1.50. The guys out on the ice field, $1.25. And the boys handling the horses, etc., 75 cents to $1. Now, yes, it sounds like a real penance in this day, but keep in mind that A good kitchen chair was $1. A kitchen table was $4. A good pair of boots, $2, and a good winter coat, $3. So it is comparative to the times. They also used about 1,000 horses. And if a farmer brought his horses with him, he'd get an extra $2 for that day for supplying those horses. The Barrytown Ice House employed 250 guys just in that one house. Okay, next. The tools. I'm just going to run through the list of tools, and then when we describe the process, I'll include those tools and how they were used. So of course you've got the ice saw and the pike. Now you notice that there's 2 points on the pike. That point's for pushing the ice. This point is for pulling. So it's a multi-use tool. And of course tongs, but they're more for delivery as opposed to our process on the river. Then we have what's known as a fork bar, a ring bar, a snow plow, and an ice plow. And the men would wear nail-studded shoes, and the horseshoes had cleats in them for traction on the ice. Now, even locally, there were 2 manufacturers of ice tools, one right in Statsburg, the Statsburg Ice Tool Company, and the Gifford Wood Tool Company, which made ice tools right here in Hudson, New York. Okay, next. Wintertime. Time to harvest ice, starting around late January, all through the month of February, and hopefully into early March, depending if they get an early thaw or not. Not going to harvest ice until it's ideally 10 to 12 inches thick, but if it's not thick enough, they had a method of thickening. It was called punching. So they would punch holes in the ice and actually flood the ice field, let that freeze over. They could do that several times until they got the right thickness for harvesting. Okay, next. Now the process. All right, the first thing they're going to do is select an area that they're going to cut. And that's called the pond. And if it has any kind of snow accumulation, they have to use these horse-drawn snow scoops and clean it all off. If the ice is rough and uneven, then they had horse-drawn shavers, and they would clear that ice and really smooth it off. Then they would mark out a big square, and it would be called the ice field. Once that field is determined, they would get those ice saws out right here, and they would cut a canal by hand. And some of these canals were up to a mile long. You know, ideally, yeah, they're right in front of the ice house, but that didn't always work that way. You got to remember too that the Hudson River has a 6 foot, so it moves that ice. And a lot of times the ice along the edge gets all jumbled up and rough, and they can't cut it. So they need a nice smooth ice. So they're out there. All the old lithographs are all right in front of them, but that's oftentimes not the true fact. So now you cut the pond. Now you're going to grid out with what's called these ice plows. They're horse-drawn. You've got one going one direction and one going the other direction. The one direction, the plow was set at 32 inches. The other direction, the plow is set at 22 inches. So you're cutting rectangles, not squares, because the ice boxes were rectangular in their ice holder container there. Now you've got the grid or the ice field, and again with the ice saw, the men will cut out these large ice floats. And they're approximately 60 to 80 cakes. That is the individual blocks. They're referred to as cakes. And these are pulled, generally they're pulled by horse. And I don't know if you saw up there, there was a double metal hook that was curved like that. That goes on the end of the ice float with a rope, and then the horse pulls that float. Even though these guys, looks like they're using pikes, but that's a big chunk of ice to be pushing by a single man. That particular hook that's upstairs was sitting in my barn for 25 years on a hook. And I would look at that about every 4 or 5 years and I wonder what that thing is. Finally, after I started doing this research, I realized, well, I'll be darned, that's a nice hook. So, once the floats start down toward the ice house, they're chopped into double cake runs with what's called the fork bar. As they get nearer to the elevators, they're chopped into individual cakes with a ring bar. And you saw those upstairs, but maybe afterward you might make another run up there and pick up a couple of those. And I mean, using that for 10 hours a day will make a real man out of anybody. I tell you, they are very, very heavy. Okay. Let's go on to the next. I think there's some close-ups. Okay, here is your ice plow. That scores the ice in that grid to about 6 or 8 inches. That way you can get those bars in and pry the cakes apart. Okay, next one. Here's a guy with a fork bar right there, and of course he's getting ready to cut maybe a big float with that ice saw. Next. This is kind of unusual. This probably wouldn't happen on the river. This would be more like a farm pond where they would be harvesting either for themselves or to sell to the ice house. But at least you get an idea of the length of these pikes. Some of them are very short and some of them are extremely long and really versatile. Okay, next. Here you have the guys moving the cakes right up to the elevators. The elevator's geared to take one cake at a time and deposit it up in the house. All right. Now, this is a little bit of a misnomer because the run is not very high. If you notice, those elevators actually drop the cakes right at the very top, and then there's a long run down. But anyway, these are the run guys. Here's a switcher. And as these cakes come down, he moves them really rapidly. One over to this guy, and these are the stonemen or stackers. And then the next one, he'll switch over. And these guys keep that momentum going. They don't stop and manhandle the cakes. Once you have the gravity action, because these cakes are up to 300 pounds apiece. So they use that momentum for the cakes, and they position them about 1 inch apart all the way around so that they're never touching each other. And then underneath the layers, they put down what's called sawgrass to keep them from melding together like that. I don't understand how they can maneuver these cakes, being that they need a slick surface, and how do they have sawgrass down between them? So it's going to like shear off fine ice particles. They're going to get spread around and they're going to make that floor really slick. It's almost like shredded ice. So yeah, I would say just the action of all the ice just made that floor really slick.
We talk about you can finish off the ice on the top, right? Make it nice and flat and slick. Is ice naturally uniform underneath? You know, the part of the ice that's in the water. Doesn't that get a little lumpy? Is that nice and smooth too when you know, saw it up?
Very good.
I'll tell you what, come January, what about you and I, we'll go out there and find out.
Yeah.
I got lots of ice sauce. Yeah, I didn't think of that.
Yeah.
We're making the assumption that
It's flat on the bottom like it is on the top.
right.
Ice skaters don't skate on the bottom of the ice.
But you're right, you know, they're trying to layer
It's
it.
probably
Could be
smooth.
thicker.
Yeah.
That one, now you got a block maybe, what, 15 inches thick, the other one's only 11.
Right, yeah.
How do you know, do they run into each other? Will they jump up on top? How many acres of ice would you need in the, you know, to fill up? And secondly, did they ever have wars? Let's say you had two competing ice houses. You know, they say, hey, you know, you've got up to this point onto the river to harvest ice, but you know, don't go beyond this line, you know, because that's our ice.
Yeah, that's kind of a tricky question because there weren't that many actual ice companies. There were a lot of ice houses, but a few companies actually had quite the monopoly on the ice industry. And there was some reports that the men did go on strike because of their low wages, and they did force these companies to increase some wages. But they had a hard time because they did have the monopoly.
I might be able to help with that question.
Yeah.
We happen to have the deed for our property that has in it riparian rights, and the property, our property began, the deed dates back to 1873. For the first owners were the Standard Ice Company, and then it was given to, or the Consolidated Ice Company. But the answer to your question about the river, it's very explicit how much property is still in the deed of riparian rights in the river. So there's it says how many points to this and that, and then exactly how many points. There was, in our particular situation, there are 9.51 acres of riparian rights in the river in front of the property. And the meadow itself, where the ice house was, is about 2 acres of house. But then it goes down embankment, an embankment, and that's at high tide, by the way. It's measured at high tide. So I think that can answer. Very specific amount, and those riparian rights belong to that ice company.
Wow.
You see. Have any of you ever been to? Presumably, many of you have to Livingston Manor to Claremont.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if you look across from Claremont, directly across from Claremont, you will see a freestanding 85-foot chimney, brick chimney. And that was part of the ice company, that was part of the ice house we think, we learned today, probably to help steam. It wasn't for fire, it was to help force the warm air out of the building during the warm time, and probably was used for steam, for the steam to go up the chimney when they were bringing the ice up from.
And I wonder what happened with the ice harvesting tools. Did they just say, well, okay, the industry's over, we just like, everybody just dropped their tools and then left? I mean, what happened to the tools and all the machinery?
Well,
Besides the
you know, we had an article in the River Chronicle about ice harvesting last winter. And because of it, a fellow got a hold of me and said, this ice saw has been sitting in my barn for 40-some years, so here it is, here you go. So they just parked them, I guess, in the barns and whatever, and that was that. I would imagine the farmers continued using them for some time, because I'm sure rural electricity for refrigeration didn't get out here quite that soon. So they may have been using ice saws and a few things, but probably not the pikes and the big ice plows.
So, thank you. Maybe you know more about building.
This is a kind of romanticized version of what was really a messy, hard job. You know, this is the artist takes some liberty with these things, but it does show the tools. I want to tell a little story about the tools, because it's not just the ice harvesting tools that I use in my work, but all kinds of tools. And very often, as Larry did, I come across something that I have no idea what it is. So I go to my expert, and my expert is here tonight. Steve Godovich from Stanfordville, who ran Wheatley Farm for many, many years. And I used to call this little exercise that we did, Stump the Farmer. And I would take this tool and take it over there, and I'd say 99% of the time, Steve could figure it out. But there were times, right, when we just didn't know what it is. So it immediately became art. We didn't worry about it. Can I see the next one? Yeah, one of these ice saws is here on the table. I don't know if you can see it in addition to that.
Just like that.
But you got to fall in love with this. Once you see it, you know, you're hooked. At least I was. And I knew nothing about these before. I came across one in an old barn. And I said, well, just look at that. You know, look at the beauty in it, look at the shape, the variations in the textures and things, and the kind of embedded energy that's in this. And you're put in touch with all these workers that handled these things before. You can feel it in the tools, you can feel it in the tools, you can see the old dings and nicks and everything else. So these things have a life of their own, and I thought that there was a lot of potential in these. Go ahead. Now, there's a show outside which has 6 pieces in it. There are now, I think, 14 or 15 pieces in this series, which is called On the Cutting Edge. And there are, I've explored a lot of different ways to use these saws in artwork. I started the first one, which is outside, called the long-necked Sawsaurus. Is a kind of a dinosaur creature outside, with the blade running horizontally, more in the spirit of the way it looks on the table. And then I moved on to these kind of totemic figures, to the vertical ones. And the reason, you know, one of the big advantages of using the vertical ones is that when you put these blades on end and you just attach them at one end, they're extremely flexible. And they will move in the breeze. You don't even have to touch them. If you leave them outside, there's a little bit of a breeze. They move like that. I have one that's not in the show here, not in the slideshow, that has 4 blades together with big steel balls on the top. And it actually makes music. When the wind blows, it goes right. So you can get music out of these, you can get motion, you can get all kinds of things. And so there are different ways of doing this. I have 2 pieces like this where I did incorporate the old handles because it gives it a kind of dynamic thrust upward. And when the breeze blows and those 4 blades kind of move independently, it shimmers. It gives it a wonderful feel. This one on the right, using 1 blade and then a big round orb behind it. That one is very sensitive to the wind and to touch. And sometimes it will, you know, sway way over like that. and back and forth. This one on this side is fixed because I took 2 blades this time and I put a big orb on it and then a leaf spring on the top. So this one doesn't move, but it does have the embedded energy of the swords in the leaf spring. Everybody who looks at a leaf spring knows that the spring is always flexing, and you get that memory of the flex in the spring. Next one. Now here, again, these are blades put in different combinations. This one on the left has 2 fixed blades again, and a fixed piece on the bottom and top reaching up. But it has a pendulum that moves. So in this case, the added element in it is the one that moves back and forth. This one, in many ways, is the most interesting one, and a lot in terms of the motion. And you can't anticipate in advance how these things are going to behave. So you have to test them. There's one outside, which is called the frantic antic. And because of the way the thing is weighted, it just gyrates back and forth. And it's extremely sensitive. And when it was in the shop, you would be out in the room and you'd walk in and nobody would be around. And the thing would start to move. And it was very spooky. It just took on a life of its own because there was a little bit of air movement. It was off, you know. Now, this one is one that's outside. And the blades are sideways, so they're flexible. And then there's this ring which is suspended like a pendulum. But when you pull it back and you let it sway, the frequency that the blade sway and that the disc sways are different. And you can go out and try it later on. When you bend it and pull it over, they're actually pulling against each other. They're not moving with each other. So it creates a very interesting tension. And then there's a couple of pieces which are anthropomorphic. This is the mother and child. And there's another one called symbiotic twins. And in this case, of course, there's a shorter blade and a longer one with the attached heads and then the hands that come together. And they sway back and forth and occasionally come together, just like the problematic relationships between mothers and children. Next one. Now, I made a conscious effort to try and get these pieces back out into significant places of history of ice and ice harvesting in the river. And this is the ice house in Poughkeepsie, right in the park along the water. It's currently a restaurant, and the building was restored. It had something to do with the ice industry, but it was not really an ice house. And so I 2 years ago, exhibited 8 pieces here along the river and in their terrace over here. Next one. And I made a conscious effort. It's really interesting. These pieces that are along the building, have these rugged and rusty patina on them, but you can see them against the old railway bridge of the same period. This is now the walkway across the Hudson. But this robust structure from the same time. And so these pieces, which are contemporary, but made with saws that were manufactured at the same time that bridge was built. So there's this historical and visual connection. Next one. And then there's, these were exhibited at Rhinecliff, at the landing down on the water. And when you get really up close to the water, and you get this majestic spread of the river from both shores, these pieces really expand to fill that space. And you see the silhouettes. This is the one that makes the sound. When the wind blows against the across the top. And these two, of course, but the silhouette against the water and against the sky, and you really feel like they returned home to the river where they belong, even though the river was frozen.
the piece you were talking about earlier.
Yeah. And this one, the last one, yeah, these are the symbiotic twins, like the mother and child, and here they're sharing a kind of intimate, romantic moment. And the sunset at the river, and again, you know, the silhouette against the sky and the water. So I look at my work in this particular area as a kind of special synergy between art, history, and nature, that these things all come together again. And there's this show in particular, because this was a great opportunity to tie the real history of ice harvesting on the river with a kind of contemporary expression of those things, was to try and help people reconnect with the traditions and the tools of industry and the value and respect for the workers and the dignity of labor. But I think we'd really like to hear from everybody about, you know, whether they're getting this connection that we're trying to put forth. And we're doing the same thing on a slightly larger scale with having the entire sculpture expo spread throughout the village, including the Memorial Park, so people can encounter these things on a daily basis, you know, become part of their daily lives. So I'm happy to answer questions, but I'm more interested in your impressions and feelings about this.
I think that I would always see a piece like this with incorporating the ice saws, and that was the first time I really saw ice saws, and it definitely made me, forced me to question what these materials were and where they were from, and I learned a lot as a result about the local history, and et cetera, et cetera. It opened up a completely new story for me.
Yes.
So say, what led you when you first, if I got the message at the beginning, you first saw a saw and were inspired. I mean, I see shark's teeth too.
Right.
But we're inspired. What before that? What were you working with, and how did you translate what you were doing as a sculptor before that into this work with the ice tools?
I worked with all kinds of tools before, and I
So
just,
you were already into the tools.
Yes, you have to go to my website to see what the variety of things are. But there were small tools and big tools and all kinds of tools. But there's something special for me about this object. And when you turn it around, it has a different aspect from every angle that you look at it, and it has this ability to sway, which immediately connects you to its use in the past, to its motion in the past. Now, maybe I'm overly sensitive about these things, but so, and that inspired me to keep digging, to keep finding other variations on this, and I'm not done. There are going to be more. Yes.
Where was the factory that made the saws? Were they on the Hudson or?
Well, there was some locally. What happened is with all of these processes, with all tools, this happened to me too, because I do a series using old county horners, which are 19th century fabulous pieces of engineering. You can see them on my website too. But these things are increasingly hard to find. You used to find old tools everywhere, but that's not the case anymore. So you end up trying to source things on eBay, and once I got interested in things and started to source there, I kind of cornered the market, and you could see the prices rising before your very eyes. And dealers out in the Midwest and every place else, they recognized who I was, and they'd start to send me information about, I got another one of these, or I got another one of those. But for me, My maternal grandfather was a carpenter and a cabinet maker. And he taught me all about tools and how to use tools and how to respect for tools. And I still have some of his tools. And it's that connection, it's that personal connection with that guy who's using that ice saw. That for me is very important. You take any old tool, you pick it up, and you can feel the people who used this before. And it's not just wood, it's easier on wood tools, because you know they wear in a certain way. You can feel the people who used these before. And it's a great feeling to pull that forward and to make something new that never existed before, using the same thing and having that embedded spirituality in it, and connection. Any more questions?
Well, I think, like the gentleman was saying, how does your work with the ice saws differ from the work you've done with other tools? Like, I know that you have the dehorners, they're just objects in themselves, and maybe these are put together with other pieces. So, I mean, how did you come to this, or did you always work that way with sort of assemblage?
Well, I try when I have things to stretch the limits of possibilities in exploring what you can do with them. But there are two things you have to avoid. One is you're not the guy who takes a shovel and puts some eyes on it and sticks it in the ground in front of your house, and you're not repeating yourself. You don't copy yourself. You take something to the next level. Everything has to be original. So there's no two alike. They're all different, and this is the way it has to be. So you have to stay fresh. And I have to say, I have a very large junk pile behind my house that I will never use up everything. But the interesting thing about this process is that some things take time. You look at them, you see them, you live with them for a while. It can take years before it finally connects with you, or you connect with it.
Treasure pile.
See, I know. Now I know what to do. Then it can take you a half an hour. So when somebody asks me, well, how long does it take you to make something? I say, 40 years.
Yeah, right.
Because that's how long the process is. And you can't rush it. You can't just take things and slap them together. That's not art. That's something, completely different.